High FM, 101.9 megahertz of life.
We're looking at how Israel has asked the International Court of Justice to not issue an emergency order. So what would this court order mean for Gaza and Israel? This is what's going on. On the 6th of March 2024, the Republic of South Africa made its third request for provisional measures within the span of less than 10 weeks. Now, not only is this fresh request highly unusual in its timing, so close to the earlier request, but it is also unusual in its bellicose and offensive tone. Joining us on the line now just to unpack this and make sense of what is going on, we welcome back Advocate Mark Oppenheimer, practicing advocate and member of the Johannesburg Bar. Advocate, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks again for joining us on the Afternoon Overdrive.
Absolute pleasure.
So, Mark, what do you see playing out here? Why such haste with such, as they've called it, emergency orders?
Yes, well, as you mentioned, this is the third time that South Africa is approaching the ICJ, and it's not a period of 10 weeks. I think it's a period of 10 days. So you have this kind of galloping stride that South Africa has tried to create, where everything is a constant emergency and we have to stop the war immediately right now because there's an ongoing genocide. And the court keeps telling them, no, we're not going to grant a ceasefire. It's told them twice, we're not going to grant a ceasefire. So South Africa keeps butting its head against the wall. And the question is why? Why does it keep reiterating the same stuff that has already been decided? Now, one of the principles in all courts around the world is that of res judicata, which means that once a court has decided something, it is decided. You don't get to go back on the same set of facts and say, please tell me something else. A court will say to you, it has been decided. And so Israel, in its response to South Africa, points out that the exact issues that are raised now by South Africa are the exact issues that it raised last year on the 29th of December when it initially brought its case and when there was a hearing in January. This issue around humanitarian aid and starvation, that issue was ventilated. And South Africa asked for a certain kind of relief at the time, which is they wanted a ceasefire, a one-sided ceasefire that would prevent Israel from engaging in its military activities in Gaza. And the court said no. 17-0, the court said, we are not granting you a ceasefire. Why? Because Israel has a right to defend itself from the terrorist organization of Hamas, has a right to go and retrieve its hostages. So South Africa says, but pretty please, this time with the cherry on top, won't you please grant us the identical relief that we asked for a couple of weeks ago? Now, maybe the court will say yes this time, or maybe they will tell them, not on your life, like they did the second time when South Africa asked for relief and the court said no.
Right. Now we've got this third approach. But, Mark, it begs the question. I mean, based on what you've just outlined now, can't the ICJ now realize or come to terms with the fact that some odd game is at play here, that something is not correct, given South Africa's stance with this court case it has against Israel? Surely there's bells ringing now.
I would imagine so. It's also something worth paying a little bit of attention to, given that a number of people have made the claim that the ANC has probably received a paycheck from Iran. This was echoed by Douglas Murray in his recent trip to South Africa. But also there's a recent news story that the ANC is still struggling to pay for its election campaign, that it hasn't put up posters yet. So maybe if we tie these two strands together, it's entirely possible that Iran said, you get your tranches of money based on how well you do it to the court. And given that South Africa has achieved absolutely nothing, that maybe that money isn't as forthcoming as one had assumed. Maybe the rest of it just isn't going to be paid. South Africa sort of furiously goes back to the court to try and get a different result because it sold the Iranians a bum car with 3 wheels, a metaphor I've used in our prior discussions. So that might explain the current predicament the ANC finds itself in.
I think it's pretty convincing what you've just outlined there, Mark. But anyway, it's what we perceive at this point in time. Mark, why doesn't South Africa have a type of an observer mission in Gaza to have a look at exactly what they are concerned about? Humanitarian aid, distribution, this purposeful starvation of civilians in Gaza, all these comments and remarks coming from this part of the world. So why doesn't South Africa have its own mission there? to verify and confirm. What are South African sources up till now?
Yes, so you see a variety of sources that are quoted in its application. Israel, in its sort of response, details the enormous amount of humanitarian aid that comes into Gaza through a number of different places, including the UAE. That, for example, they've helped facilitate food coming in from Cyprus through a floating vessel. So there's a sense in which the South Africans have done what they usually do, which is to focus in on certain incidences and then not pay attention to others. One of the most egregious ones is this idea that there is an escalating famine which will accrue at an exponential rate, not just a linear rate, and they cite a report. And the Israelis point out that report shows that no one has died of malnutrition at the moment. So to make this sort of claim that we're on the cusp of catastrophe, which is how the South African papers read, that any moment now every person in Gaza is going to starve to death, just isn't borne out by the facts. And so that kind of alarmism you find throughout in the papers. And as you say, you don't have this independent verification. The South Africans aren't there getting a sense of things on the ground. Now, of course, you must recognize it's a war zone, that it's not exactly a delightful place to be. But the reason for that, of course, is because of what Hamas did on October 7th. It has imperiled the lives of all those civilians living in Gaza. It has created this terrible situation for them.
Indeed. Mark, interesting. I read this report earlier on, a 21-pager as to Israel's response to South Africa's wanting these emergency measures to be looked into, which you've just outlined now. And in the report, it speaks of, well, Israel now has submitted that report it was supposed to have submitted on the orders of the ICJ within a month of that hearing. So the report now has been submitted. What is the reaction been to that? What is South Africa's reaction been to that report?
Yes, so Israel's report is not publicly available. South Africa appears to have responded to that report.
Right.
I haven't seen that response either. But part of what Israel deals with in this is to say, well, nothing has really changed. We have abided by our obligations in terms of the ICJ, which is to produce a report.
Right.
There is much detail in that report. South Africa has had an opportunity to respond to it. And instead of engaging and waiting for the actual merits trial, which is to determine whether Israel is committing a genocide or not, keeps bringing these interim measures at a breathless pace within days of each other, basically off the same set of facts. And as I say, that strikes me as a breach of the ordinary principle of res judicata. This has already been decided. The court has decided what provisional measures there will be. The facts don't seem to have changed substantially,
right.
And it doesn't warrant a change in course.
Mark, just to conclude today's chat, I'm sorry, we just ran out of time, but there's one particular clause that caught my attention, which I believe sums this all up. If I can quote, South Africa seeks to re-litigate what the court has already decided and to have the court micromanage the conduct of hostilities in Gaza, not because this is in any way legally justified or required, but as a way for South Africa to seek continual political attention and to demonstrate continuing solidarity with its ally, Hamas. Mark, on that note, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much once again for joining us on the Afternoon Overdrive to give us a breakdown as to exactly now what South Africa is attempting to legal-wise. Advocate Mark Oppenheimer, practicing advocate and member of the Johannesburg Bar.